Hi, you're listening to Scribble Talk Teaching, a podcast for bid and proposal professionals. My name is Dr Seuss, and I'll be sitting down with our industry veterans to dive deep into the topics that business-winning professionals like you can use to help you grow your skills and your business. Today's guest is Larissa Cornelius, and we'll be talking about Green Eggs and Ham, the book, Stories That Sell. Let me first introduce Larissa. If you don't know, Larissa was already featured part of the Scribble Talk episode number 34. In my opinion, Larissa is an author. 100% she's an author, but she would disagree with that. But Larissa owns nFold, a South African-based proposal consultancy that inspires success through words that win. She's also the chair of APMP South Africa, and she has over 20 years of experience in business development and operational experience. She's certified APMP Professional and was voted one of the 40 under 40 professionals in 2018. So by combining proposal best practices with an operational and sales background, Larissa actively promotes the proposal profession and helps business to win more, not just in South Africa, but every country she touches. As he told you, Larissa also is a fantasy book author. She was an actress early on, and she heads up the South African APMP chair. Today, we are going to talk about Green Eggs and Ham by Dr Seuss, which was written in 1960. As of 2014, the book sold over 8 million copies. If you haven't read the book, please do read the book. I've just ordered a copy myself. So in this fun session, Larissa will share what Green Eggs and Ham and Dr Seuss teaches us in terms of creating proposals and stories that sell. The talk also explores if stories will improve your bottom line, which is all what we are trying to do in Tenders. So welcome, Larissa, to Scribble Talk Teaching.
Thanks so much, Bhaskar, for having me back. And I'm excited to share one of my favorite stories and authors, and I guess it brings back some childhood memories as well.
Got it, definitely. Welcome back, Larissa. Larissa, a brief or a good overview of the book. Let's talk about the book, Green Eggs and Ham.
So I kind of want the audience to sort of, as they're listening to this podcast, to sort of sit back and relax as they imagine a plate of green eggs and ham in front of them. And today I hope to excite, your inner kid and explore what could happen if we move beyond business as usual and start building content that's engaging and powerful by harnessing the energy of a well-told story. And as you mentioned, Green Eggs and Ham was written by Dr Seuss, and it was written in 1960, yet as of 2014, the book sold over 8 million copies, and that number is consistently rising. And it's a great example of a story that's compelled young audiences around the world for generations, and I suspect generations still to come. And many an adult has enjoyed using this book to get their fussy children to try new foods and to start reading. Besides being my daughter's favorite book, well, when she was younger, she's now 12, it's also been acclaimed by some as one of the best sales books out there, which we can definitely debate after this talk. But I thought it would be interesting to see how we could use it to learn to tell better proposal stories. So to give you the gist of the story for those who don't know it, there's a character called Sam I Am. And for the purposes of analogy, we can think of Sam I Am as a persistent sales guy who starts the book running in with a sign saying, "I am Sam." Then he shows a sign saying, "Sam I am." And he insistently tries to get an unnamed character, a very grumpy looking character, to try and taste green eggs and ham. I'll call him Grumps for analogy. This is the prospect customer. And Grumps, of course, seeing the plate of green eggs and ham, doesn't look very appetizing, refuses and says, "I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam I Am." And Sam I Am, believing in his product and knowing somehow that if he keeps persisting, Grumps will like green eggs and ham. And he is never once throughout the story despondent, and he continues to offer Grumps multiple scenarios which he may like or may enjoy green eggs and ham. And he follows Grumps through multiple locations, stating if he would like green eggs and ham. For example, maybe you'd like green eggs and ham in a house, or with a mouse, or in a box, or with the fox, or on a train, or in the rain, or on a boat, or with a goat, and all rhyming too. Sam I Am is rejected quite to the point of making Grumps, the potential client, irate, getting told no 14 times, and each time more emotionally. But as any really good story, or at least in my view, there's a happy ending. And Grumps finally gives in. Provided that Sam will leave him alone, he says he will try the green eggs and ham. And amazingly, miraculously, as he tries it, his whole face changes and he responds, I do so like green eggs and ham. Thank you, Sam I Am. So that's the scenario in a nutshell.
Wow. I think there are so many things that we can take away immediately from this. Number one is the persistence of Sam I Am, obviously trying to convince Grumps you need to have the green eggs, which is what happens, right? Especially now, even before the normal world, Larissa, as you know, people say they need to consume like 7 hours of content in 4 different types, or like 6 to 7 meetings or emails that you need to send even before they say yes or read what you are doing. But at the very high level, that's the one. But the second thing is, if you believe in your product or service, and if you're consistent, you get these things done. But that's fascinating, and also I love the character that you perceive, which is Grumps, which is a good one. So the story, Larissa, I think obviously the story is about how can we make a child eat food, fruit and veg, to it. So, it was that looking back from that thing, I mean, children are the toughest customers that we ever face in our life very early on, right? And then, but on the other side, children are also very, very clever in getting everything from their parents in whatever format they have. So let's just use this story as an example. And you did mention that your little one, who is now 12 years, also read this book. Let's talk about that little child experience of you using that book to sell that story, how to make your child eat fruit and veg.
I want to try and relate it as well, the story that I learned, from my daughter, and sort of take some of the lessons. And how we can use that in our stories. And I think there's quite a few lessons we should learn not to do in the story as well. But I think the amazing thing that Dr. Seuss did here was that he really presented the book in a format that speaks to your early readers and your fussy eaters, by making it rhyme, using very simplistic words. And so there's a lot of aspects in here that we can use in our own sales proposals. So I agree that there's some notable lessons, and I can see how some people have related sales lessons. So I agree with you that throughout the story, he buys into his value and he's consistent. He introduces himself in a memorable way. So, there's always that need to create some brand recognition. And in the story with my daughter, it's the characters and the colors and the pictures that I think really help with the rhyming that makes it quite fun. And especially if you make all the voices and the sounds, that used to get my daughter absolutely giggling. But I think also Sam doesn't take rejection personally, and he doesn't challenge any of the objections from Grumps, but rather proposes alternative scenarios in which the green eggs and ham might be preferred. And obviously, it's a happy story for a persistent salesperson, because in the end, he gets the product into his customers' hands. And in the end, I convinced my daughter every now and again to try something new. So that was always good. But I think if we have to consider it in a real life situation, if I had taken green eggs and ham in a real life situation, I think the customer may have eventually gotten a restraining order on Sam, because you'll see as you read the book, it builds up at how upset the grump gets, to say, I will not like green eggs and ham, not in a house, not with a mouse, not with a fox, not in a box. And it continues along the lines of that. But it seems to me there's one really key aspect that's missing from the story for good proposal stories, and that there's no indication to me that Sam knows the customer, seeing that he is actually unnamed in the book. I just gave him a name because I like my customers to have a name. And in real life, perhaps the client might have been allergic and had a real reason not to try it. And that ending could have ended in a lawsuit. And I think the reality is that customers today, they can have green, blue, yellow, or any variety of colors and styles of eggs and ham. They can even get digital eggs and ham or a menu for gluten-free, vegan, or Banting options. So I think in today's reality, we can no longer sit and rely on just our services and products to sell themselves, nor our brand. And we can't just find ways to make one size fit all. We cannot expect customers ultimately to do business without compelling reasons. I like to think of it as that the era of relevance and convenience is well underway. And this creates pressure on businesses to move away from purpose to fit to more fit for purpose approaches in our stories. And this idea of copy and paste and one solution fits all is a thing of the past. People still like to do business with people they know, like, and trust. That's a fundamental psychology that I don't think is going to change. But this no longer guarantees work. Ultimately, governance, procurement procedures, transparency, technology, and competition place strain on a lot of old school sales and proposal efforts. And customers are living in a world overloaded with choice. And as a result of this, we have to be creative to give attention, keep attention, and to close deals. And therefore, we can no longer bombard prospective customers with all the services and products we offer, but just with what will work for them based on their needs. We also need to do this in a manner that is easy, convenient, and most importantly, we need to stand out. People may forget facts, but they never forget a great story. The words that are used in green eggs and ham is just so memorable. I'm sure that, as a kid, you would have known all the words, and it will take a matter of reading it once again and you'll remember all the words. So I really wanted to explore this to say, so what is then the secret of telling a great story? A story that will help us to step out from the background, to get ahead of the numbers, to put a name, a face, and some personality behind the effort to increase engagement with the objectives. So I think what we can learn from Dr. Seuss and the story in proposal writing efforts, because we've learned a few sales lessons, is that he's got this brilliant ability to deliver work that communicates with his given audience, and as you said, kids. And he does this with interesting titles, illustrative pictures and colors, and something very noteworthy is a very precise selection of words. Green Eggs and Ham, by the way, uses very simple vocabulary, and the entire book only consists of 50 words. And the word anywhere is the only word in the entire book with more than one syllable, which is perfect for kids learning to read. Dr. Seuss, like most stories, also has a really good beginning, a middle, and an end that continues with a sort of key strategy or a key win theme, and this golden thread going through the entire book. And in the beginning, you start with a picture with Grumps, who's sitting there, he's reading his newspaper, he's looking very lonely and unhappy. So for me, the beginning is about, where's the customer at? Where are their current pain points? What does their current situation look like? And then it's really about looking at what is that end, what is going to get the customer to a happy place. So unlike Green Eggs and Ham, where it is going to be him eating green eggs and ham, in the customer's environment, what is it that they want? Where is it that they want to be? And then the middle is really that story of how we'll get customers to take specific project steps and solutions to get them to that ending, to that happy ending around there. And So I think that's really a pertinent key lessons we can take from Dr. Seuss. But I really wanted to look in terms of this talk today around, so if we want to achieve this, where do we start? I think the first place is to establish who is the audience. So very much like Dr. Seuss, the book is for kids. And so here, our proposals are for a specific audience, a specific customer, specific people at the customer. So the better we know the customers, the better we can respond to their needs, their language, and the outcomes that they want to achieve. And then understanding what outcomes are important to them and how can we get them there, first and foremost, because if we can't even start to talk about that, the customer, you're going to lose interest. You're not going to engage your audience. And customers then, only then, once they show you what you're going to do, how are you going to help them? Do they want to know what benefits will you bring them, why they should do business with us, and if we can actually do it? And as a result, this part of our story, this middle part of our story, should focus on some proof and some specifics to create that credibility within the story. And then obviously we want to ensure the story is memorable. We need to make sure that we have no more than 3 really clear win messages of why we should get the customer to where they need to be. It's not going to help us to keep repeating green eggs and ham, or keep repeating the same message across, although I do think that some repetition is actually a very effective persuasive technique. We have to have a slightly different approach for our audience. So I put together seven proposal tips for storytelling, Bhaskar, that I want to share. And I think that this Dr. Seuss does this extremely well. Except for maybe the first one is, stories are about the characters and people connect with other people. And proposal stories, the more we can tell stories of other customers where we've done it before, of our people, of their people working together, how we can help them to work together, the more effective our proposal story can be. We need to make it personal and relatable to the audience. I think authenticity is so vital to instill trust. And so using things like direct quotes from customers can make it extremely powerful. Audiences bore easily, very much like children, and certainly like my daughter. I think she loved the book because it was fun, it was easy to remember. And again, we want to make sure that these days our attention spans are super strained. Unless you're keeping people interested, you're wasting your breath. So when telling a story, we want to get them engaged. We want stories that stir up emotions, hopefully positive emotions if it's proposal stories. So as human beings, we're just not inclined to think about things that we don't care about. So stories should stir up emotions, not to be manipulative, not simply for melodrama, but to break through the white noise of information that continuously inundates us, and to deliver the message and to make somebody read that this is worth their attention. And I think stories that do it well are stories that don't tell, they show. Showing and not telling is a powerful storytelling technique, and for good reason. The more your audience should see the picture, feel the conflict, and become more involved with the story, rather than just being receptacles for long lists of facts and writing. And stories must have at least one moment of truth. When the final line is spoken, your audience should know exactly why they took this journey with you. In the end, this may be the most important rule of all. If your audience can't answer the question what the story was about and why they should care, it won't matter if you followed rules 1 through to 6. A great story enables the reader to visualize their goals and their outcomes. A compelling story, whether it's graphic, written, or spoken, is a tool that can be used to break through the noise and rise above your competitors. The power of story is a profound one, and it can help you to connect with and move your audience and make your material memorable. Scientifically proven and advocated by many a psychological study, is telling stories is and has always been the best way to teach, to understand, and to persuade. Our appetite for stories is a reflection of our basic need to connect and understand the world around us. In fact, there's some scientific facts around good stories. Firstly, good stories increase the following hormones: dopamine, which increases your focus, motivation, and memory; oxytocin, which makes you more trusting, generous, and it creates a bond and empathy; and endorphins, which create laughter and relaxation. But I guess the one thing I wanted to sort of explore further than Dr. Seuss was, can a story really result in tangible business results? And do they impact the perceived value? So to stir away a little bit from Dr. Seuss, I want to tell you a brief story of Rob Walker and Joshua Glenn. It's a true story, and some listeners may already know it, but this story is set in New York City in 2009, where two curious journalists conjured a plan of sheer brilliance to test if stories could impact the value of objects. They called the social experiment the Significant Objects Project. For this experiment, Rob and Joshua went to purchase 100 cheap items totaling $129, items most people would call junk. Then they called on their connection of published writers, and they got a writer per object to write a short fictional story per object versus factual description. And they loaded a picture and story of each project on eBay. An example of such items was like a cow ornament bought for $2 that they sold for $62, a snow globe for 99 cents that sold for $59. The long story short is they sold these objects for just under $8,000, a major profit. Why? Because the story resonated with the buyers. I suppose using known writers didn't hurt the situation, but the experiment, regardless of how you look at it, did show that not only can stories provide tangible business results, stir emotion, but they can impact the perceived value as well. Clearly, stories are good and in rare cases, awesome. But good stories need to connect with the intended users emotionally. And if you learn anything from today, I want it to be to move actually away from the usual all about me proposals. I don't want people to be Sam I Ams. I rather want them to think of another Dr. Seuss book. I want them to think of Horton Hears a Who. And Horton is a large elephant who hears a who, a tiny person who lives on a speck of dirt. And only because he's got these huge ears can he hear the who. And he listens to what the who needs, which is to get their home to safety. And Horton goes on a journey with the who's to achieve the results and the outcomes that they want. And Horton is the type of salesperson that the new era of convenience and of choice requires, where we journey with our customers to achieve sustainable business results. So I want to share, just as a last note, before we get into more discussion around this, is there's a quote from social media today that resonates with me. It says, processes, systems, automated attendance, and technology have separated companies from customers. The future of business success is in shared experiences. And it's these shared experiences, I believe, that form compelling proposal stories.
I was just ferociously typing what you were telling, Larissa. I mean, it's like, God, how many characters have you brought in this 15, 20 minutes introduction? I was, honestly, listeners, I wasn't prepared for this level of preparation from Larissa. Please do give her an applause. Thank you. Larissa, I mean, when you gave an intro about Dr. Seuss book, you just mentioned how Sam I Am convinced this unknown character into having this green eggs with just 50 words. Is that right?
Yes.
50 words. And I think as business winning proposal professionals, imagine if we have to write a proposal to share our solution or why do we need to buy from us in 50 words. First of all, what would you do? I mean, that's hard, isn't it? It's like a Twitter message. I don't know how many characters. Twitter has 200 characters or something, right? And if that's all we need to write about, why we are different, why you need to buy from us, what would you do? That's one. And secondly, as you beautifully pointed with the social experiment, where the two journalists who just sold stuff which they bought for $1, $2, managed to sell it for $8,000. That level of creative writing kinds of got lost over the years, where, as you know, the focus was more about churning more for less. How many proposals can I do at the shortest time, and all of the things. When you step back and see, okay, we want to make this, as the beautiful point that you mentioned at the very end was, it's about the experience that you're going to leave with the customer. Even if you lose the bid, they have to say, damn, these guys are so good and I really want to work with them. And they come back to you in different forms to just do that. And that's the story that you laid. And your pointers about, the tips that you gave, one of the key pointers was super useful as well, Larissa. So let's just go back and then talk through these pointers, Larissa. You know what? Let's do a reality check in our standard so-called process, right? Which is the first word that you said. We lost companies to customers because of all these process systems and other things. Unfortunately, we are in this cycle of you have a strategy, understand the strategy, then you define who your market is, then define who the customers you want to target in the sales cycle, then you qualify, then you bid for them, then you just do what it takes to convert them into a recurring customer. In between comes the marketing between sales and proposal. So these stories that you're talking about, where do you think we need to place these stories?
I think that, obviously I've taken very much a sort of the stance around proposals, because that's sort of where our niche is. But I think you hit it on the nail on the head, is that it really starts with the marketing, and then it transforms from your marketing stories into the stories that the salespeople start to have, or your business development people start to have with the customer. And then it's about then coming back into that bid process. You cannot divide the bid process from the business development process. There's so many key elements and integration between those processes that work so beautifully. And where you can get that consistency of stories happening, I guess your marketing story is a little bit wider reached, maybe to a specific market. Whereas once you start speaking to customers, it starts getting targeted very specifically a niche to those prospect customers, to those specific opportunities, in which then it becomes a strategy, or it starts forming part of our basis of our strategy plan or our win strategy in the capture planning phase, in our business development phase, before hopefully it goes into proposals. And then we mustn't forget, once it's gone into proposals, often we get shortlisted into processes, and we often have to follow up with a pitch. And that pitch needs to be the continuation of that story, because that consistency is so important in terms of breeding trust.
That's a beautiful point, Larissa. I think, as you rightly said, define what your brand stands for. What does your brand tells the story to the market? Because if they like you, then they buy from you, right? And the story of Dr. Seuss, clearly tells us, stories do sell, or stories only sell. So, and as a proposal professional, yes, we have a certain structure that we work with. Here we go, guys. Do a capture plan. And once you do a capture plan, then you just do what we call a bit of comparative matrix or something, understand the pain points, and then compare with your existing competitors or new competitors, and find your differentiators. And then you put that into a theme statement and build up your value propositions, etc. So using that kind of flow, Larissa, then, the stories that Dr. Seuss did it, did you find some of those patterns within that stories? I mean, like, obviously there is no competition, so that's okay. But as you rightly said, there is this Mr. Grumps, who is the customer. Mr. Grumps has his own pain points. And then, Sam I am worked very hard 14 times to just tell these guys. So, taking that story as an example and then going through this sort of flow to define, have we go, Grumps, this is why you should do it. Is there something that we could learn from the story in the way that how we approach things as proposal professionals?
Absolutely. I mean, you made a good point earlier when you said, imagine if we as proposal people only had 50 words to use to reduce it. And I think that's the genius in Dr. Seuss is I think that we often I see too many organizations wanting to, put in way too much information for the clients instead of keeping it simple. And I think if you've got a solid strategy and you really think about the types of words and key messaging that you want to bring together and bringing in pictures, we're not different to our children counterparts when we were kids. We still like pictures and images. Life is busy. So we want to bring in things like those persuasive titles and pictures that help communicate the same message and story. So I think as proposal people, I think understanding the strategy, really thinking about the key messaging we want to bring across and finding it the concisest way to put that together in a memorable way. And I think although we probably won't tend to go to rhyming like the book does, I find one of the key memorable things is using items in three, is having those sort of three key messages, because that's, as people, we do everything in three. We think in three. There's a powerful psychology behind the power of three. And I think if you try and put more than three sort of key elements, no one's going to remember it. So what are those three key messages, repetition items that's really going to make your value proposition and what you're offering stand out? And I think once we've got that, and that strategy is so important to get to that, we should aim to reduce ourselves to a short and concise way of putting that together to persuade the clients. And we should use images and we should use a visual strategy to communicate and help support the messaging we're bringing across to make it more memorable. And so I think the book, if you're looking at the book in its entirety, it does that, right? It speaks to the audience. It's well researched for the audience. The words were thought out thoroughly for the purpose that the book was intended to do, which is to teach kids, a lesson to eat and try different things, but also to read. And so we should be doing and taking that same sort of care with our customers, those persuasive headings, those pictures, and understand what are the characters that our audience are going to be able to relate to. If we're speaking to an asset management firm, then the characters we're speaking to there are very different than if we're talking to a construction company. Very different characters that they would relate to. And these are the types of things we need to think about when we start to conceptualize our persuasive proposal stories.
Well said there, Larissa, well said there. I mean, like, I'm still fascinated, like if a child, because that's what they say, right? How can you explain what you do to a child? And if a child gets it, then, Mr. Grumps will get it, or Mrs. Grumps will get it, or Miss Grumps, him or her will get it, right? And that's the underlying principle. How can we explain that to a child? And this book, gives us that, how can you convince a child to do what it doesn't want to do, which is like eating veg, green eggs. And if that's possible, then Mr. Grumps, as you said, it's in my opinion, it's nothing, right? Because this person is a grow up, and primarily you just need to, work around it. But that's fascinating. I think you also mentioned think about those three things, that matters, that you can convince to your customer in 50 words. Larissa, I think if we look about this book, Green Eggs and Ham, what would you say the 3 things that this book specifically teaches us?
Good point. Good question. So I think the first one is absolutely, it teaches us the power of plain language. At the end of the day, we tend to think, because we've gone through various levels of education and years of experience, that we have an attention span that differs to children, and that's not really true. In fact, if we look at the average grade level in America is grade level 8. I would argue that we must be about the same in South Africa, considering we spend, we have 11 official languages. If you look at the business time, they speak at a grade level 10. Yet I still see too many proposals sitting at a grade level 12 or even a grade level 14, which is too high for putting clarity of message. So I think clarity of message and that plain language is absolutely critical to what Dr. Seuss talks about in his books. I think the other thing is making sure that you understand your audience is definitely, for me, so critical in terms of what we do in proposals. Is we need to understand our customer. We need to understand our audience, so that not only the language, the colors, how we put or construct our messaging needs to be able to communicate to that audience. And he does that with rhyme, using really short 1-syllable words, using some repetition throughout the process. And then I think that consistent visual strategy for me is so important to help just tie the story. Dr. Seuss's books are known for the wonderful illustrations in it. And I think the same is true when we put proposals together, is making sure we've got a consistent visual strategy that helps support the messaging that we want to bring across, to make it clear and as plain as possible why the customer should choose us versus anybody else, and what is that ultimate value that's going to result to in their business.
That's it, Larissa, especially the last, the 3 points are absolutely critical. And the last point that you mentioned, which is like, your words needs to go with the images, right? Or the images needs to go with the words. People like me, we only see images. I rarely read anything. If it's full of text, I switch off immediately. But there are people who enjoy text 100%. So that's fascinating. I mean, like what you just said now, and it's super important as us as proposal professionals. I think we should not just get stuck with what the RFP says or what we need to answer to this particular questions. It's important to take a step back and understand what are we actually saying here? What's the story we are telling? Not necessarily the questions will enable us to tell our stories, but somehow we need to find our way to share that story and consistently share that story wherever possible. Because most of the time we are very good in looking at individual questions and finding the responses to those questions and getting the highest score for those individual questions, which is great. But then if we take a step back and say, hey, what are we actually trying to do with this customer? Then you find we responded like 90 questions, and all 90 questions gave us high marks. But what are we actually going to do for them? How, when, what? And that's where the executive summaries or other things comes up. So again, here is a nice new template for us to do, for us to say. And I always say, does your proposal have a soul? For me personally, people have choices, right? I like Larissa, I love Larissa, and there could be other people, but I want to get it from Larissa. Because why? Because I can't explain that feeling, but I just want to work with this company, work with this person, right? And it's important for us to understand that what the stories tell you is the stories share a soul, and in your proposal, does your proposal share that soul, which is like, this is what we believe in, this is what we stand for, this is why you need to get from us, and so on. So, but that's fascinating, Larissa. When you came up with this topic, I was like, green eggs in ham. Okay. Stories that sell. I mean, like, here we are talking about this in a more passionate way. I mean, like, it's South Africa. Let's just go for a regional valuation. I know, there are listeners are from like so many countries here, and last count was in 71 countries. Now it's much more, the listeners are much more wide. But let's just go back to South Africa. I mean, like, so this story and the way you apply that to your clients or your bids, etc. Let's just talk that through. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think by applying it to our clients, I guess, again, it's very much following that process, again, of understanding really clearly who our customer is. And I don't believe, and this might be, I think that there are absolutely cultural differences and aspects involved, and probably even more so in in South Africa. As I said, you've got 11 official languages. A lot of the time we might be working with other countries out in Africa, and sometimes we even engage with international partners working within projects in Africa. So, but I think regardless of that, I think it's understanding your customer and understanding their cultural needs and requirements, not only from where they're based, but also from their own organization. Each organization has very much its own culture. And I like to think of how we apply stories in terms of our proposals here when we're putting them together is really about creating, I kind of like to put the analogy of a hero's story, except we're not the heroes. The customer is the hero, right? We're the enabling force that's going to help to enable the customer or the hero to reach their goals at the end of the story. So I often like to use the analogy of, like, if you think of the Avengers, again, I suppose I'm using a non-African reference here. It just shows you how much globally we get influenced. But, if we use the story of, we want to get the customer, and I think John Williams and them explain it well, is you want to get the customer from point A to point B, which is, if I use the Avengers again as an analogy, they need to be able to go back in time so that they can save the half of the world that's disappeared in Avengers Endgame. And in order to do that, they need to move back in time. So I kind of see us as suppliers is we've got that mechanism to empower them to get to that end goal of what they want to achieve. And the story that we're telling is, how are we going to help them? So one, we need to show a client. So let's say, for example, a big theme here in South Africa is really around empowering skills development. We've got a very strong skills development shortage. We've got a huge youth job creation initiatives that we need to have in place, because we've got massive amounts of unemployed youth in South Africa. And so, a lot of the time, what's happening socially and understanding that from the customer and what their role is to play within that can also often become a powerful part of the story. So how can we take understanding some of the challenges the country's facing, how does that impact the customer, and how can we tie this into a sort of a story that's going to add value to communities, add business value beyond what the customer's asking for, but that will still provide that benefit at the end of the day for the customer to say, why should they care about that, is absolutely critically important. So, the stories we will take is really around what are the objectives the customer wants to achieve. Once we know that customer and we understand a little bit more about them and their culture, what is it going to take to help them to achieve those objectives? And once we know that, we can say, okay, how does our solution actually help them to achieve those outcomes? And once we've got to how we're going to help them to achieve those outcomes, where those proof points we can provide, facts, quotes, figures, references of where we've done it before, where we've provided similar results, where we've provided additional value to communities, for example, where we have been able to optimize Black empowerment scorecards as a result of implementing certain services that show that you can apply a sustainable solution to the client, but that is still going to add value for money, because ultimately people still want the best value they're going to get for their buck. I do not believe our stories are about price. I don't believe proposals are awarded on price. So I know that's a contentious one to potentially debate. I think it's important, but it's more important to understand what is that price point, or what is that point of value for the client. And when we are able to effectively articulate these compelling stories that speak to the value the customer wants to achieve, and where we can find additional value to provide to customers that doesn't increase that bottom line and increase the budget they need to get the services, then I think we stop playing a price-only game and we start talking value. And that's the game where I think most sustainable businesses want to be in. And I think in South Africa in particular, if we want to bring that, is that's an area where we need to improve on, absolutely, is to really get out of this price game, which I see a lot of small businesses suffer from, is that they don't always know how to accurately articulate their value. And a lot of the time they will pursue business where they're not making profits. And that's something that's absolutely critical to think about in the story, not only in the stories, but in our overall strategy and approach to pricing when we put proposals together.
Totally. I think that's like a curve that goes through, Larissa. I think in 2015 to 18-ish here in UK, it's the cheapest price that wins. Even some areas still how it is. But today, if you have the lowest price, then you are not the winner. It's all about the median value or the optimum value here in UK now. So you shouldn't be expensive, obviously. At the same time, if you're cheapest, then you're still not considered. So people now are being trained or they need to learn how to find the right value. So far, they have been so used to cut everything out. Let's go with zero margin or negative margin to just buy this tender at any cost. Now that behavior needs to be, which used to be the successful mantra for far too long, is now being taken out. And now they all need to find that optimum median value. And I'm sure South Africa will follow in a few years coming. But
we're going through that transition now, definitely.
Yeah, I think it takes time. And all you need is few big companies. Unfortunately, like what happened here in UK, few big companies failed here. That created a lot of ripple. And when they understood what cost it, it's because they all were procured at the cheapest price. Which puts a lot of pressure, and gradually things are moving. But you know what? It was fascinating to hear you again, Larissa, and thank you for sharing about. We will add this book, a link to this book down part of the podcast episode. But what a topic! Stories that sell, with Dr Seuss, green eggs and ham. And it's quite fascinating how we managed to touch so many parts within this. I'm sure listeners will get a lot of snippets from this. But from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much again, Larissa, for joining us today. As always, it's been an absolute privilege to have you with us, and wish you, your family, all the good health and happiness. Merry Christmas. And I will definitely speak to you again in the new year.
Thank you. You too, Bhaskar.